In the dawn light of ancient Greece, where shadowed mountains cradle the horizon and the rivers speak in whispers of forgotten times, there rose a city unlike any other, a city born not merely of stone and sweat, but of myth. According to legend, it was Lacedaemon, son of the mighty Zeus himself, who carved this settlement into the earth beneath Mount Taygetus. He gave it a name, a purpose, and a legacy that would echo for centuries. This was Sparta. But Sparta was not molded by myth alone. It was forged in the fire of conflict, in the union of four villages, Limni, Patana, Massoa, and Cynosura, that banded together not for commerce, not for art, but for strength. In the fertile Eurotas Valley, they built more than a city. They built a war machine. Sparta's society was unlike any other in the ancient world. It was a hierarchy of power and obedience, divided with terrifying precision. At the top were the Spartiates, warriors born and bred for the battlefield, citizens whose only purpose was to serve and defend the state. They were the elite, the bloodline of Sparta. Beneath them stood the Perioeci, free men who lived on the outskirts, allowed to trade and craft, but denied a voice in governance. And then there were the Helots, descendants of conquered peoples, bound to the land, laboring in silence, their existence a perpetual reminder of Sparta's conquest and control. This rigid order was no accident. It was by design, set into motion by a figure as mysterious as the city he helped define, Lycurgus. Lycurgus was no ordinary lawgiver. Some say he was real, others claim he was a ghost of political mythology. But his reforms reshaped Sparta into a state where individuality was sacrificed for unity and where freedom meant submission to a greater cause. He introduced a dual kingship, two rulers presiding side by side, their power balanced by a council of elders known as the Gerousia. Alongside them stood 5 ephors, officials elected to oversee the kings and enforce the law with unflinching discipline. At the base of it all, an assembly of male citizens approved decisions, but never created them. Sparta had become a system, a code, a relentless machine designed not to thrive in peace, but to dominate in times of war. And yet, for all its structure and control, the true test of Sparta's design would be how it shaped its people, especially from the moment they could walk. Sparta did not educate, Sparta forged. Childhood, in this city of warriors, was not a time of comfort or innocence. It was a crucible. At the age of 7, boys were taken from the arms of their mothers and delivered into the agoge, a state-run training system designed not to raise children, but to craft instruments of war. This was no school. This was an ordeal. Hunger was constant. Cold was expected. Pain was routine. Silence was survival. These boys were taught not merely to fight, but to endure, to disobey emotion, to break their own fear. Stealing food was not punished. It was encouraged as long as you were clever enough not to get caught. But failure brought pain, and pain was the teacher that never left. In this relentless environment, only the strongest rose. Leadership was earned through dominance, not diplomacy. Weakness was not tolerated, it was removed. Boys fought daily, bled often, and learned to sleep on reeds in the dirt, all under the watchful eyes of older youths and seasoned mentors. They were taught how to kill, how to think like soldiers, even in play. Discipline was not a word, it was law. And loyalty to Sparta came before blood, before family, before the self. Their minds were sharpened like blades, their bodies carved into living armor. Every scar was a lesson, every bruise a reminder that survival was the only reward. And while the boys endured the furnace of the agoge, the girls of Sparta were trained in strength of a different kind, though just as fierce. Unlike the rest of Greece, where women were veiled in silence and locked in private quarters, Spartan women were educated, athletic, and powerful. They ran, they wrestled, they spoke freely. They managed estates in the absence of men. They gave birth not only to children, but to legacy. In Sparta, the mother was not merely a caregiver. She was the shaper of future warriors. Her strength was seen as essential, her role sacred. It was said that only strong women could bring strong sons into the world. And in this dual design, boys hardened into iron, girls raised to command, Sparta became something far more terrifying than just an army. It became a complete war machine. And what that machine could do on the battlefield would soon shake the foundations of empires. War was not an event in Sparta, it was the rhythm of existence. The city did not sing, it did not trade, it did not paint. It marched, it bled, it conquered. Spartan culture orbited war the way a planet clings to its star, utterly dependent, entirely defined. From the moment a child could lift a stone, he was taught to wield a spear. From the moment a youth could run, he was drilled in formation. There were no symphonies in Sparta, only the clash of shields. No marketplaces, only training grounds. No treasures, but iron, bronze, and bone. Art was the shape of a sword. Beauty was found in the curve of a shield. And glory was not measured in coins, but in how long you could hold the line before you fell. The Spartan hoplite was more than a soldier. He was a sculpted weapon, layered in bronze, shield in one hand, spear in the other, marching shoulder to shoulder with his brothers in the unbreakable phalanx. This formation was more than strategy. It was an extension of the Spartan soul, unified, disciplined, without weakness or hesitation. To retreat from battle was not merely shameful, it was unthinkable. Spartan law demanded victory or death. There was no space between. Their war cry was silence, their reward remembrance. They fought not for plunder, not for expansion, but because war was woven into their identity. It was ritual, it was duty, it was the only acceptable fate. And in the shadowed cliffs of Thermopylae, that fate reached its most legendary form. In 480, before the Common Era, as the Persian Empire sent wave upon wave of soldiers through the narrow pass, King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans stood unmoved. They were not expecting to return. They were not hoping to survive. Their mission was defiance, to show the world what it meant to be forged by Sparta. Day after day, they held the line against a flood that should have drowned them. Their stand was doomed from the start, but they turned defeat into something eternal. Even in death, they won. Because they became the symbol of unwavering resistance, of honor that cannot be broken, of men who walked into oblivion with their heads held high. And yet, for all the glory bathed in blood, there was another enemy rising, not from foreign lands, but from within the city's own soil. Not every enemy came with banners and blades. Some threats grew in silence, unseen, unarmored, yet far more dangerous than any foreign invasion. Beneath the flawless bronze exterior of Spartan power, there pulsed a quiet and constant dread. The Helots. They were not soldiers. They were not citizens. They were the enslaved, the conquered peoples of Messenia and Laconia, forced to till the land and feed the very warriors who oppressed them. And they were everywhere. For every Spartan warrior, there were 7, sometimes even 10 Helots. Numbers that alone struck fear into the hearts of a society that claimed to fear nothing. These men and women were shackled not by chains, but by an invisible wall of terror, beaten down by generations of humiliation. But resentment does not die, it waits. In the year 464 before the Common Era, the earth itself betrayed Sparta. A colossal earthquake ripped through the Eurotas Valley, shaking the city's foundations to rubble and burying thousands beneath stone and dust. Temples crumbled, barracks shattered. Entire generations of Spartiates were lost in seconds. And in that chaos, through the smoke, the screaming, and the broken walls, the Helots rose. They saw their moment, and they seized it. What followed was not a riot. It was a rebellion, organized, ferocious, and terrifying in its precision. For years, Sparta fought to regain control, clawing back from the brink as the Helots claimed strongholds in the countryside and refused to bow again. The invincible city had nearly fallen, not to the Persians, not to Athenians, but to the hands that harvested its wheat. That moment changed everything. The Spartans, already hardened by war, became consumed by fear, not of foreign invaders, but of their own fields, their own servants, their own soil. A new ritual was born in the shadows of this dread, the Crypteia. It was not an army, it was not a court, it was a sanctioned hunt. Young Spartan men, barely more than boys, were sent into the night with knives and no witnesses. Their mission was not to kill enemies, it was to eliminate Helots, the strong ones, the clever ones, the ones who stood too tall. These were not battles, these were executions, justified by the thin veneer of control. It was fear disguised as order. It was the price Sparta paid for power without economy, for dominance without diplomacy, for glory built not on trade or ideas, but solely on the blade. And as the city bled itself dry, hunting ghosts in its own fields, another storm was gathering, this time not underground, but from across the seas. It began as a rivalry, a long simmering tension between two visions of civilization. On one side stood Athens, radiant, wealthy, adorned with marble columns and crowned by intellect, a city of philosophers, sailors, and silver-tongued orators. On the other side, Sparta, austere, silent, and made of iron. A city that did not speak unless it was to command. For decades, they eyed each other across the Aegean, like wolves circling the same carcass. But in 431 before the Common Era, patience ended. Alliances were drawn like blades, and the entire Greek world was set on fire. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a coalition of land-based states hardened for war. Athens commanded the Delian League, fortified by fleets, gold, and ambition. What followed was not a war, it was a reckoning. Nearly 30 years of betrayal, starvation, plagues, shattered treaties, and cities left in ash. Sparta, though mighty on land, lacked a navy. Athens, mistress of the sea, blockaded ports, raided coastlines, and sowed rebellion behind enemy walls. Yet Sparta endured, and when it could no longer fight on its own terms, it turned outward for aid. Persia, the old enemy, offered silver in exchange for silence, and Sparta took it. With Persian gold, they built a fleet. With that fleet, they broke Athens. The final blow came at Aegospami in 405 before the Common Era. The Athenian navy was trapped and annihilated. A year later, Athens surrendered. Its long walls were torn down to the sound of Spartan flutes. For the first time in history, the city of soldiers stood over all of Greece. And with iron in hand, they placed their stamp upon it. They did not celebrate. They installed a brutal regime in Athens, the 30 tyrants. Freedom was suspended. Voices were silenced. Blood ran where ideas once flourished. Sparta, shaped for conquest, now found itself in the uncomfortable seat of empire. But a sword makes a poor throne. They did not rebuild what was broken. They did not understand diplomacy or commerce or culture. They knew only how to command and how to destroy. As months turned into years, resistance festered. Cities that once allied with Sparta now turned away. The loyalty won in battle was lost in peace, and what had taken decades of war to build began to crumble, not under attack, but under the weight of its own silence. And in the north, a new kind of warfare was stirring, one that Sparta had never prepared for, not on the battlefield, but in the mind. The illusion of Spartan invincibility shattered in a single afternoon. In 371 before the Common Era, on the flat fields of Leuctra, a new enemy rose, not from the east or across the sea, but from within Greece itself. Thebes. Led by the brilliant general Epaminondas, the Thebans executed a maneuver that rewrote the art of war. They struck not with numbers, but with innovation, concentrating their might on one side of the battlefield and smashing through the very core of the Spartan line. The result was not just defeat, it was humiliation. Spartan warriors, once believed to be unbeatable, lay dead in the dirt. Their myth was pierced, their aura broken, and with that single blow, the Spartan Empire began to bleed out. The consequences were swift and irreversible. Messenia, the land whose people had labored for generations as Helots, was liberated. For the first time in centuries, the enslaved became free. The population that once fed Sparta now stood beyond its reach, and with them vanished the economic foundation that had propped up the warrior class. Sparta's power did not just shrink, it collapsed from within. No longer feared, the once mighty state drifted into irrelevance. City after city that had once trembled at the sound of Spartan boots now ignored its fading voice. The phalanx that had marched across continents was now a relic of memory, not a weapon of war. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell. Alexander came and went, and then Rome. When the legions arrived in the 2nd century before the Common Era, they found not an empire, but an echo. Sparta still stood, yes, but it stood still. The warriors had become actors, posing in armor for curious Roman nobles. Tourists wandered its streets, hoping to glimpse a shadow of greatness in the crumbling walls and the hollow glances of men born too late to fight. What remained were stories of spears and shields, of mothers who told their sons to return with their weapons or upon them. The blades had rusted, the glory had dimmed, but the legend endured. Because Sparta was never built to last, it was built to burn. It taught the world to fear, but it never learned how to build, how to heal, or how to love. In the end, it died as it had lived, hard, cold, untouched on the surface, but hollow at the core. And yet, from that emptiness, a name survived, etched in the language of endurance, in every tale of defiance, in every monument to unbreakable will.